trying to promote demonstrations on Martin Luther King birthday and all that to sow racial discord in the United States. Now, by the way, we don't need help. Okay? We got enough, right? But they actively want to undermine the American system because they believe that it is bad for them. So there's a very big difference between how the Russians are handling Veni and what other countries do. Yeah. Thank you.
Got the point here?
Yeah. Explain something.
Right. So basically, the question was, okay, what's the difference between China's role in Venezuela versus Russia's role in Venezuela, and China's role basically in the global economy is that China doesn't want to disrupt. They want stability. They want other countries to thrive, because if other countries thrive, they will thrive. With the growth of the economy in the United States, growth will come to China because they're doing business with China. So China is not actively trying to destabilize. They're trying to gain influence. Russia is trying to destabilize. Wherever United States has an interest, they are trying to undermine and seed disparity. Russia's attempt to gain influence is by disruption, is negative influence, where Chinese influence is positive influence with the clear objective to basically China is printing money and giving money to developing nations in exchange basically or actually in an attempt to get influence over these countries. But influence, not to disrupt them, but basically to get most influence.
About Russia?
Russia is basically trying to support every party that is aiming to destabilize the current structure. So the Yellow Vests are aiming to disrupt France at the moment, and Russia is sponsoring their attempt. So this Twitter account, the Twitter account is actually there were Russians behind it, and what was done through this Twitter account was trying to create racial tensions within the United States.
He said Russia is declining, right?
Russia is declining. The Russian economy is now smaller than the Italian economy.
Yeah. So, what prospect we're going to consider for Russia?
Well, basically, it seems like what he's implying is that Russia's role is ending. Russia's role in the world economy is ending, and the only way that they are letting their influence be felt is through disruption. They're trying to maintain relevance, but they are not constructively built. They don't have a constructive role in the world today. Basically, they are an anti movement, trying to divide, trying to weaken the other side, whereas China is basically trying to strengthen the other side. Their interest is in basically getting as much influence as possible.
They try to get more power.
Yeah, more power by basically with whoever wants to do business with them, by providing them with money, and through that
how do we consider
increase their influence?
How do we consider? Do we have any involvement with Russia? We can get some national interest, or can we negotiate with
As
Russia?
Japan, you mean?
Yeah. This is my interest because Russia country is so huge, but I know that they have no industry except oil, and but they have lots of opportunity.
Well, there is this. I mean, basically, I think what Russia doesn't have at the moment, and what is not good for them. I mean, basically, they're in decline. What Japan has a lot of is money, and Russia is in decline. They don't have any friends. So that could be the basis of a common interest. Russia is still diplomatically speaking, they carry much more weight than Japan at the moment, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
China are interested in Siberia? No, not much.
Well, there is this. I mean, I don't know whether today the interests of the world is still so much focused on fossil fuels, or whether China and other economies are already having their main attention on renewable energy sources. But Siberia obviously has a lot of fossil fuels reserves, who will be expensive to get out of the ground. But yeah, that is something that that could be considered. The benefits of fossil fuels being there and being able to mine these fossil fuels, that will be of interest of Japan, because Russia is Siberia is not that far away. Well, you just click. Oh, okay. But can you just click on the go to the right, yeah, and then click here. Yep. So Russia could be interesting because it could actually produce oil, and a pipeline could bring it directly to Japan, or at least to the east coast of Russia, and could be easily transported to Japan. Russia doesn't have any friends. They can use all the friends that they have, but Japan seems to insist on always making a case of these small islands, Kuril Islands. Basically, I think I don't know why it is such a big issue to Japan, but I think if they are a little bit more pragmatic about it, then they could actually benefit from a relation with.
Yeah, Mr. Abe have a relationship with Trump, so he cannot make a big reaching out to Russia.
Well, everybody's doing it. I mean, England was told not to engage with China, yet they're doing it. Basically, England is and European countries are an ally of the United States, but at the same time they were supporting Iran.
Are they? Not Iran?
They were. They were supporting Iran because actually United States unilaterally stepped out of the nuclear deal with Iran. And the only reason that then the European countries kept supporting Iran to stick with the nuclear deal. But what Iran insisted on is they said, okay, well, we will step out of this nuclear deal if you don't compensate for the losses that we are incurring from the United States stepping out of the nuclear deal. Now, what we see in the last week is that, I don't know if you followed that news, but British troops were entering a Russian oil tanker who they are suspecting of, and based on American intelligence, British Marines entered a Iranian oil tanker at the Strait of Gibraltar and forced it to stop their voyage, and now keeping it with millions of dollars of oil, multiple $1 million of oil, forcing it to stay anchored in Gibraltar. And that is very remarkable because actually Europe.
What is their objective?
Their objective, basically, this was an American objective. Americans said, okay, there is a embargo of selling oil to Syria, right?
Oh, Syria.
Syria, but Iran, because they are losing their market because they are under economic sanctions of the United States. they had actually been moving oil around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, coming in from the west through the Mediterranean back to Syria, which is of course like kind of ridiculous if you think about it.
Why are they moving around?
Because obviously they can't go direct because there are
can't go direct.
so they were going around and then bringing oil in through the Mediterranean to Syria in order to circumvent the sanctions from the United States. But the United States tipped off England, and England, because they said, okay, well, this is not against Iran, but this is more against Syria. They entered the ship, forced it to stop, and now Iran is saying, okay, well, if Europe is not going to support it, and if the United States are against us, then we're going to start enrich uranium so that we can more quickly develop a nuclear bomb, which is a strategy that they saw from North Korea. It helps because actually North Korea, it's a small economy, but it still carries a lot of clout because they have a nuclear bomb. So that's now their trump card. We are just going to continue to enrich uranium in order to gain more negotiation power.
Right.
So it's working against the United States, but this is a natural reaction. This is a logical response of Iran, who are now seeing that their allies in Europe are not sticking to their end of the deal, and they say, okay, well, in that case, we just need to step out of the nuclear agreement. It was surprising that the United States
who is stepping out?
So basically, United States was stepping out of the nuclear deal, right?
Out.
But for a long time, almost for a year, Iran did not start to increase their production of. Maybe there's one open.
No.
Different one?
Yeah, different.
Oh, okay.
This is oil.
This is sweet
oil.
one.
I don't need. I should not eat, but I'm sleepy, so I just.
Nonetheless. Iran didn't start to increase uranium because European countries were trying to do business with, trying to compensate the loss of business that they were doing with the United of
Really?
yeah.
But they fear for American sanctions.
Well, you could say that, but I think actually the closer to, reality is that they were caught in a catch-22 situation, where on the one hand they wanted to prevent Iran from stepping out of starting to develop uranium, but at the other hand, they didn't want oil to go to Iran. So they felt that okay, yeah, we do, because there are sanctions on Syria, so that weighed heavier than keeping Iran from developing enriched uranium. Therefore, England decided to respond, which now isolated Iran. So that the only thing that they can do, what Iran can do, is restart the enriching of uranium.
Restart what?
Enrichment of uranium. Because that will give them negotiating power against the United States.
By the way, EU countries, they are still trading with Iran?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah, they were. Because as far as they are concerned, as long as there is no proof that Iran stepped out of the nuclear deal, they want to keep it going. They feel it's working. It's only the United States who unilaterally stepped out of it.
Okay.
They can. Yeah.
Go to this side.
Cannot hear this question. I couldn't hear it before.
more Chinese studying in America, learning about the United States, and bringing that to Chinese and bringing Chinese experience to America. I mean, if I were not president, because you couldn't do this president, if I were king of America, and I could do one thing, I mean, there are a lot of things I'd want to do, but I could do one. I would make it mandatory for all American high schoolers to spend 1 year outside the United States. Fully funded, with real-time translation device, preferably not Canada, Australia, UK, actually a place where they have to learn different culture, truly different culture, right? You're here doing that. That's awesome. So you're already doing it, in my view. But I think that we need to recognize that there are some areas that the Chinese are seriously competing with us, and it's heading towards Cold War, like technology, like 5G, like AI. There are other areas where the Chinese are not. On trade, we still need each other, which is why Trump decided not to go to 25% tariffs, because we actually want the mutual exposure. I mean, the Chinese have huge assets in American treasuries. They don't want to undermine and implode our economy. Diplomatically, the Chinese aren't a superpower. They're a regional power. And as a consequence, if we were to actually broker peace in Israel-Palestine, John Kerry or God bless Jared Kushner, right? I mean, yeah, I know it's not going to happen, but the Chinese would be fine with it because they'd like to see more stability. They go and they meet with the Iranians, they meet with the Saudis, they meet with the Qataris, they meet with everyone. Why? Because they want actually to benefit from that economically. So, I mean, we shouldn't, even though there are areas where the Americans and the Chinese are increasingly fighting, and we are on technology heading towards a Cold War, there are actually many areas where our two economies are quite integrated or at least aligned. And the biggest one is climate, right? We did most of the emitting historically. The Chinese are doing most of it now. And, AOC talks about a Green New Deal. It's not a Green New Deal. It's a Green Marshall Plan. Green New Deal, we're going to stop emitting in the United States, not going to move the needle. What we really need to do, yes, we need to invest in our workers, but we need to actually invest in the Chinese and the Indians in finding a way to get them to emit less as poorer countries. Now, by the way, AOC would never say that, and neither would Trump, because none of us want to spend that kind of money outside the United States. But that's what you would need to do if you want to avoid 4 degrees warming and instead have 3, which would be a good thing. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks. Go ahead.
I'm Ryan. I'm an operations management major. You talked a lot about how the first world is being affected by the failure of globalism, and you did touch a little bit about third world with Mexico and Brazil, but generally, how is the third world, the developing economies, being affected at this point from the failure in globalism arising in the first world?
It's a very good question. It's one of the reasons why I'm glad you asked about those other countries, and I brought Mexico and Brazil up. So I think one of the most interesting questions on the displacement that comes from technology is that so many of the jobs that are going to be affected most are the ones that those emerging markets have just gotten into. It's the more advanced manufacturing, but not the super high end, and it's the early stage white collar jobs, right? Those are the ones that are going to be easiest to displace in the next 10 to 20 years. Interestingly, China might be in a better system to deal with that. Number one, because they actually have a demographic shift where they're having fewer kids just at the time where labor is getting disentangled from capital. But secondly, because they have a system that allows the government to employ lots of inefficient labor if they want to, which the American system does not have, which the Indian system has much less. And so that's an interesting question. The other point, though, is in democracies, you're seeing a whole bunch of leaders that are getting elected because of social media. Bolsonaro was the first Facebook president in Brazil. That was the first social media election. I think you'll see a lot more of that. People that learn how to use technologies first are the big winners when you have those shifts. Think about radio in the US and FDR. Think about television and JFK. Think about Obama and grassroots with Facebook. Think about Trump and Twitter. That's coming real soon to emerging markets.
Thank you.
Hi, wonderful talk. My name is Lee Marie Thompson, and I teach a course on social enterprise here in the business school. My question is not necessarily related to social enterprise. Some may argue that, well, you know, the losers of the old world are simply making a political, a social, and an economic comeback. So what are your thoughts on the extent that the rise of the rest could positively affect the development of a holistic order with all stakeholders accounted for?
Well, again, it'll take time to get there, right? But, I mean, there is no question that when you are facing some global challenges, like the U.S. and China involved in potential for real confrontation, or climate, or this post-industrial revolution, if that's what it ends up looking like, those are things that are truly global in scale. One of the things to be most optimistic about is that over the last 50 years, pretty much every major problem that was out there, if you wanted to fix it, you had to rely on white guys. And, I mean, I'm all in favor of white guys, right? I mean, as one. But that's a lot to ask us to do. And, I mean, if you think about the people that are going to be actually fixing climate, we're going to have white guys, we're going to have white gals, we're going to have black and brown and yellow. I mean, we're going to have Africans in urban centers are going to be a part of the solution for the first time in history. I mean, they're creating really educated people that have access to global knowledge base. China, India, same thing. You know, you not only think about how many more Mozarts you get when you actually are empowering young people from a body of 7 billion population as opposed to a body of a few 100 million population, you're just going to get a lot more excitement. And you're going to get a lot, and not only that, but these people come from diverse cultural backgrounds, diverse intellectual backgrounds, which means they're probably going to have different ways of thinking and different ways of applying solutions. And, you know, when I think about a world where GDP doesn't work very well as a holistic measure of human success, right? But there's no way you're going to fix that if you do it within a Western model. But if you do it in a model where you have people that didn't grow up with it's all about GDP and it's all about fetishizing growth. I mean, the Japanese don't fetishize growth. Right? For the last decades, they actually fetishize stability and resilience and community and infrastructure. So more than 50%, next year, more than 50% of the world's GDP, PPP adjusted, is coming out of Asia, right? That's extraordinary, and it means that a lot of people are going to think differently about things like GDP. So I get really upbeat about that. I'm glad you asked that question.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Ian, I do have to check for time here. So we have 4 questions.
What is talking about Japan?
So what he's talking about is that basically, this globalization and globalism, it is a global problem. It is something that is a first world problem, but it's also affecting third world countries, and that basically it is a global problem. That and then the question was asked, okay, so how likely are we to get to a global solution, something that will a global problem? How likely is it that we will find a global solution to this problem? And then what he's saying is that actually, so what we have had in the past is that basically all the people who had the influence, who had the education and the influence that for the past centuries, they have been white people, because they had the money, they had the resources, they had the infrastructure to actually bring change that could be implemented on a global level. Europeans have been colonializing the world. They had the infrastructure and they had the power to actually implement these things. So these white people, the solutions had to come from these white people. Now, nowadays that situation has changed. So it's not only white guys, but also women, and it's also black guys and women, and Asian guys and women. So actually there are more and more people getting into this, and nowadays what we see is that in our model, in the European model, in the American model, GDP was always center to to measure success. So if we would raise GDP, that would be good. That's the objective. So we raise our GDP, we all get richer, and ultimately we will be happier. Now, basically,